What if the objects sitting around you right now, like your coffee mug, or a decorative vase on a shelf, or maybe even just the garbage can under your desk,
Yeah.
what if they're actually the perfect literal mirrors for the state of your mind?
I mean, it sounds almost like an absurd thought experiment, right? We tend to view the objects in our lives as purely utilitarian. A cup is just a cup.
Right, exactly. It holds coffee, that's it.
Exactly. But when we strip away our modern functional view of the world and we look through the lens of ancient philosophy, these physical containers, they cease to be inanimate objects.
They become something else entirely.
Yeah, they become a profound blueprint for understanding human psychology, our readiness to receive truth, and honestly, the brutal battle between the ego and genuine enlightenment.
Which is exactly why we're so thrilled to have you with us for today's deep dive. Because our mission today is to decode this highly tangible, ancient metaphor that bridges Eastern philosophy and Western theology.
The concept of human beings as vessels.
Yes, the vessel. And to understand this, we first have to look at the mechanics of how human beings actually absorb wisdom or truth. We have to start with this concept of a seed transforming into quanta.
Yeah, let's break down that mechanism because it's so foundational. A seed represents pure potential truth, an idea or divine wisdom in its most dormant state.
Right.
If you hold a seed in your hand, it has the potential to feed you, but it isn't food yet.
You can't just chew on a raw grain of wheat and get much out of it.
No, not at all. It has to be planted, it has to grow, and it has to be harvested. And only when that potential is realized and consumed does it become what we might call quanta.
Quanta, so like a discrete, measurable packet of energy or sustenance that actually nourishes a person.
Precisely. So we have wisdom acting as the seed, and the realized energy from that wisdom acting as quanta.
But for any of that energy to be captured, held, and utilized, you need a container. I mean, you can't just have liquid energy floating in the void.
Right. It requires a boundary. A boundary is essential. Without a container, water simply dissipates into the ground.
It just makes mud.
Yeah, just mud. And without a vessel, wisdom dissipates into the ether. Which brings us directly to Eastern philosophy, particularly Laozi and the Tao Te Ching.
Oh, this part of the source material was fascinating.
It really is. Laozi relies heavily on this imagery. There is a famous phrase, Daqi Wan Cheng, which is often translated casually as late bloomers.
Right, like someone who doesn't find their career until they're 40 or whatever.
Exactly. But if we look at the literal translation, it means great vessels take long to complete.
That reframes the entire concept of human development for me. We usually think of late bloomer as, someone who just took a while to figure their life out.
Yeah, they just stumbled around a bit.
Right. But translating it as a great vessel implies a deliberate manufacturing process. Like, it takes time to forge something massive enough to hold a significant amount of truth or responsibility.
It's not an accident. Laozi is talking about heavenly vessels, people who have been forged to hold divine purpose.
And this establishes a hard and fast rule for decoding ancient mythology and religious texts.
Right. It does. Whenever an immortal, a deity, or a divine figure is depicted holding an object, what we call a dharma vessel, that object is not a decorative prop.
It's not just a cool accessory for the statue.
No, it represents a person.
Okay, let's apply that to a visual example. Take Guanyin, the bodhisattva of compassion.
The great example.
In classical depictions across Asia, Guanyin is almost always standing there holding a jade vase, and often there is a willow branch dipped inside it.
And most people look at that and see a symbol of purity or nature. But applying this alchemical and philosophical rule, both the jade vase and the willow branch are metaphors for people.
Both of them.
Both of them. The vase is a human being who has been hollowed out and purified to hold the water of compassion.
Wow.
And the willow branch, which is flexible, resilient, and capable of taking root wherever it is planted, is another person. A person being nourished by the vessel and dispensing that compassion out into the world.
So the Dharma vessel is literally the person receiving the divine way. And, this imagery isn't confined to the East. We see the exact same psychological framing in the Bible, in Matthew 13.
Yeah, the parable of the yeast.
Right, there's the parable of a woman hiding yeast in a large amount of dough. The dough acts as the vessel. The yeast is the seed, the truth, being infused into it.
Exactly.
So the dough represents a person or a group of people being fundamentally altered by what is placed inside them.
And notice the chemistry there, too. Yeast doesn't just sit in the dough. It fundamentally changes the structure of the container it occupies. It expands it.
Right, puffs it up. It changes the nature of the thing entirely.
Whether we are looking at a batch of dough in the ancient Levant, a jade vase in China, or a leather wineskin, the human soul is consistently framed as a container whose nature is dictated by what it holds.
And there was a critical distinction made here between small vessels and large vessels, isn't there?
There is. Small vessels are individual people, but a large vessel, like a massive cooking pot or a bronze cauldron, represents a team, an organization, a nation, or even an empire.
This completely shifts how we analyze sociology in history. I mean, a nation isn't just a plot of land with borders.
No, it is a massive cauldron holding millions of smaller cups. The state of the large vessel is entirely dependent on the quality and the contents of the smaller vessels inside it.
Okay, I want to explore the friction in that dynamic. Let's look at the modern corporate world.
Sure, that's a perfect modern parallel.
You operate as your own vessel.
Yeah.
You have your own capacity, your own emotional contents, your own skills. But you are placed inside a department, which is a larger vessel.
Right.
And that department is placed inside a multinational corporation, which is a massive cauldron. So human history is basically just a nesting doll of vessels.
A cup inside a pot, inside a cauldron. And the friction occurs when the contents of the small vessel contaminate the larger one.
How so?
Well, imagine a highly skilled but deeply toxic CEO. They are a small vessel filled with ego, paranoia, or greed.
So we've all seen that.
Right. Because of their position, their contents spill out and infect the entire corporate cauldron.
It just leaches into everything.
Exactly. The larger vessel begins to boil over, not because the structure of the company is inherently flawed, but because a crucial small vessel inside it is poisoning the water.
So you listening, this forces a moment of introspection. I mean, what kind of vessel are you functioning as in your daily life?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It really is. Are you operating with the illusion that you are just an independent cup sitting alone on a table? Or are you aware that you are a component inside a much larger pot? Your family is a pot. Your community is a pot.
Yeah, and if the pot you are in feels like it's boiling over or feels toxic, you have to examine the smaller vessels contributing to it.
And when that toxicity reaches a critical mass, when the friction between the small vessels and the large vessels becomes unsustainable, we reach what ancient traditions describe as the ultimate friction. Yeah, the apocalypse. This brings us to the book of Revelation, specifically chapters 15 and 16. The imagery here is incredibly cinematic and intense.
Very Hollywood.
Totally.
Wow.
7 angels step forward, and they are handed 7 golden bowls. These bowls are meant to be poured out upon the earth, unleashing severe plagues.
But before we look at the plagues, we have to interrogate the material of the vessels themselves. They are gold.
Right, not just clay or wood. Gold.
Yes, and in ancient alchemy, metallurgy, and theology, gold is not just a symbol of wealth. It represents a very specific spiritual attribute.
Which is?
Eternity. Gold is immutable. It does not tarnish, it does not rust, it does not degrade over time. It is entirely independent of its environment.
Contrast that with bronze or copper. The source material makes a specific reference to Buddhist imagery here, right? Contrasting a gold arhat with a bronze arhat.
Yes, an arhat is a perfected person, someone who has achieved enlightenment. But a bronze arhat represents betrayal.
Which seems weird until you look at the metallurgy.
The metallurgy explains the metaphor perfectly. Bronze is an alloy. It's a mixture of copper and tin. It is compromised by definition.
And more importantly, bronze oxidizes. It tarnishes.
Exactly. It reacts to its environment and degrades. So an arhat made of gold is eternally faithful, unbothered by the toxic environment around it.
Right.
A bronze arhat represents a person whose spiritual constitution degrades when exposed to worldly pressures. They betray the path.
So the angels in Revelation are not holding bronze bowls of compromised judgment. They are holding golden bowls of eternal, unchanging, pure truth.
Yes.
And when these bowls are poured out, the effects are catastrophic. The first bowl is poured on the earth, causing severe sores. The second hits the sea, turning it into blood.
The third hits the rivers, and the fourth bowl is poured directly onto the sun, causing scorching heat.
And this is where we must confront a massive failure in modern interpretation, because prominent modern leaders and commentators often stand at pulpits or on television and claim these plagues are literal prophecies of modern warfare.
Oh, yeah. They argue the sores represent biological weapons, or the sea turning to blood is an ecological disaster caused by chemical warfare.
But can a biological weapon be poured onto the sun?
No, of course not.
The physics of that literal interpretation completely falls apart. It's nonsensical.
It falls apart because it entirely ignores the metaphorical framework the ancients established. If everything is a vessel, and vessels represent people, then the targets of these golden bowls are also people, or systems created by people.
Okay, so a sore is not a literal skin disease from a bioweapon.
Not at all. A sore is an internal infection breaking through to the surface. It is a spiritual disease.
Oh, wow.
It's corruption, greed, or malice that has festered inside a person for years, finally breaking out into the open for everyone to see.
And what about the sun? I mean, how does the sun represent a person?
In ancient celestial hierarchies, whether in Egypt, Babylon, or Rome, the sun represented the ultimate human leader, the king, the emperor, the pharaoh.
Oh, right. They were literally called sun gods sometimes.
Exactly. The celestial bodies were mirrors for human authority. Therefore, pouring a bowl of wrath onto the sun doesn't mean a supernova millions of miles away.
It signifies a divine judgment.
Yes. An exposure or a curse being poured out directly upon a human leader.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If pouring wrath on the sun simply means a corrupt political or religious leader is being exposed and judged, doesn't that take this massive cinematic apocalypse and shrink it down to everyday human drama?
It localizes the apocalypse. The end of the world isn't a catastrophic meteorological event in the sky. It's happening right now in human relationships.
Right.
It is happening in boardrooms, in government halls, and the unmasking of corrupted individuals. The apocalypse is the revelation of truth pouring over a system built on lies.
How often do we misinterpret the apocalypses in our own lives? You know, we sit around waiting for the sky to fall or for our company to literally go bankrupt, when the real crisis, the actual plague, is a breakdown in the underlying human relationships around them.
We completely miss it.
Yeah, the leader has been cursed, the spiritual disease has set in, the inner workings are rotting, but we're still staring out the window looking for literal storm clouds.
We miss the internal collapse because we are conditioned to wait for an external explosion. And measuring that internal collapse requires a very specific tool.
Which leads us to the economics of the soul and another type of vessel entirely, the scale.
This is a fascinating pivot in the text.
Yeah, let's read from Revelation 6.6. It presents what sounds like an ancient grocery list or maybe a comment on hyperinflation. A quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius.
Right, and for historical context, a denarius was a Roman silver coin, roughly equivalent to a day's wage for a laborer.
Okay.
A quart of wheat was the minimum amount of food required to keep one person alive for one day. So this verse is describing starvation wages working an entire ruling day just to survive until tomorrow.
But beyond the economics, the text argues that the measuring tools themselves, the scales, the balances, the quarts, are fundamentally vessels.
Because you cannot measure a volume of wheat without a container to hold it. The tool of measurement must first be a vessel.
Right. So what is actually being measured here?
What is being measured here isn't just grain. This measurement standard begins with one person bringing the standard, represented by the 1 quart of wheat, and it grows to encompass 3 people, represented by the 3 quarts of barley.
So the scale represents the standard of the Tao, the way, the ultimate living truth. And here is the paradigm shift. People themselves are the scales.
Yes, moral and ethical standards do not exist in a vacuum. They cannot be written on a piece of paper and perfectly understood. A standard must be embodied.
It has to be lived.
Exactly. A single individual embodies the Tao. They become the living scale. Then, through their influence and their actions, that standard propagates to 3 people, and so on. Human beings are the living instruments by which the truth or falsity of others is measured.
So if you place a person who is perfectly aligned with the truth into a corrupt environment, their very existence acts as a scale that measures the shortcomings of everyone around them.
That's beautifully put.
Just by walking into the room, they are the quart that proves you were only holding a pint. They don't even have to say anything. Their integrity exposes the lack of integrity in the room.
But to measure anything accurately, that scale, that human vessel, must be flawlessly calibrated. It must possess specific, uncompromising physical properties.
Because you cannot use a cracked cup to measure liquid.
No, you can't. And you cannot use an ego-driven person to measure spiritual truth.
Which forces us to look at the physics and the manufacturing process of a vessel. 2 defining characteristics must be present for a vessel to be useful. Number 1, it must be empty.
Very important.
If it is not empty, it cannot hold God's food or universal wisdom. And number 2, it must be made of dirt or clay.
The material is our foundational reality. Clay represents the human heart. To craft a masterpiece, you need exquisite clay.
Right.
Think of Jingdezhen porcelain, historically renowned as the finest in the world. The artisans there knew that you couldn't make imperial pottery from standard mud. You had to have high-quality earth.
But having good clay, having raw human potential, intelligence, empathy, is nowhere near enough. Potential is not a finished product. The manufacturing process required to turn good clay into a vessel is, frankly, violent.
It is a process of systematic destruction.
Yeah, you take this high-quality clay and you leave it out to be scorched and sun-dried until it's rock hard. Then you smash it with heavy iron hammers.
Just shatter it.
Right. You take those fragments and grind them down to a fine microscopic powder with massive millstones. You take that dry dust and drown it, mixing it with water. Only then can it be shaped on a wheel, and finally, you throw it into a blazing firing kiln.
And the psychological equivalent of this manufacturing process is a perfect map of ego death. The smashing and grinding represent the mandatory pulverization of a person's ego.
Because before you can hold universal truth, every preconceived notion you hold about yourself, every point of pride, every stubborn ideology, it must be smashed.
You cannot mold a hard clod of dirt. It must be broken into dust.
And the emptiness. We go back to the Tao Te Ching. Laozi observed that a bowl is made of clay, but it is the empty space in the center that actually makes it useful. A solid block of clay is just a paperweight.
The clay provides the boundary, but the emptiness provides the utility. Psychologically, this emptiness means purging oneself of worldly distractions, biases, and impure thoughts.
You have to create a spiritual vacuum.
Yes.
So what does this all mean practically? It's like trying to pour fresh, incredibly expensive artisanal coffee into a mug that still has a quarter-inch of last week's rancid, curdled milk sitting at the bottom.
The fresh coffee is instantly ruined.
Completely ruined. You cannot just add good to bad. You cannot pour enlightenment or divine wisdom on top of a massive, unexamined ego. You have to empty the mug, and you have to scrub it out violently first.
Yeah, that scrubbing is not optional.
But this raises a deeply uncomfortable question about the smashing part. Is personal suffering a mandatory step in becoming a useful vessel? It implies you can't just read a book and casually decide to be a good vessel. You have to be hammered.
Adversity is the mechanism of creation. The hammer, the heavy millstone, the scorching fire, these are life's hardships, betrayals, and failures.
They aren't just bad luck.
No, they are not random accidents of the universe. They are the manufacturing process.
Yeah.
Without the fire of the kiln, the clay vessel looks beautiful, but the second you pour water into it, it dissolves back into mud.
Oh, that makes sense.
Suffering is what bakes the shape into permanence.
Which introduces a massive philosophical dilemma that we cannot ignore. If we are the clay undergoing this violent manufacturing process, who is swinging the hammer? Who is controlling the kiln?
That transitions us to the Apostle Paul, Romans chapter 9, and the profound problem of fairness and sovereignty.
The imagery shifts dramatically here. We are no longer just examining the clay, we are looking at the potter. In Romans 9, Paul argues that a potter has the absolute right to take the exact same lump of clay and make two entirely different things. From the same earth, he can craft an honorable vessel, a beautiful gold cup, a trophy, something displayed on a mantle. And from that very same lump, he can craft a dishonorable vessel.
And the historical examples used for dishonorable vessels are blunt, toilets, spittoons, garbage cans, containers designed exclusively to hold waste.
To illustrate this dynamic, the text uses the historical story of Moses and the Pharaoh of Egypt. This narrative completely flips our conventional understanding of good and bad people on its head.
We have to look at how ancient society viewed these two men before the plagues, before the Red Sea.
Society looked at Moses and saw a completely ruined vessel. I mean, look at his resume during his exile in Midian. He was a murderer on the run. He was a political outcast.
A shepherd, which was a despised profession to the Egyptians.
Exactly. He was a man who seduced a woman from Tyre at a water well. When he returned, claiming a burning bush spoke to him, his peers thought he was delusional. He was a disaster.
He was the equivalent of a cracked, dirty pot sitting in a desert gutter.
Meanwhile, society viewed Pharaoh as the ultimate flawless great vessel. He was a god king, presiding over the most advanced, powerful empire on the planet. He had wealth, status, and absolute authority.
Yet look at the potter's choice. The creator bypassed the magnificent, polished vessel of Pharaoh and chose the outcast, the murderer, to be the vessel of divine glory.
And what role did the potter assign to Pharaoh?
Well, the text explicitly states that God intentionally hardened Pharaoh's heart.
He set Pharaoh up to be stubborn.
Yes, to fail, specifically to display his own divine glory through the plagues and the Exodus.
This tackles one of the most abrasive philosophical questions in theology. Paul addresses the outrage this causes directly. He says, "Who are you, a created thing, to talk back to the Creator? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for special purposes and some for common use?"
The argument being made is that the wicked, the dishonorable vessels are entirely necessary to the grand design.
They are referred to as beating sticks, drawing on Proverbs 16.4, which states that the Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the wicked for a day of disaster.
A beating stick is a tool. Its entire purpose is to create friction, to strike the clay, to create the adversity necessary for the honorable vessel to manifest glory.
Right. If Pharaoh simply says yes the first time Moses asked to let the people go, there is no miraculous exodus.
There's no parting of the sea.
Exactly. The manifestation of glory strictly requires the immovable obstacle. And once the beating stick has served its purpose, once Pharaoh's army is drowned, the stick is simply put away in a closet, discarded.
But we have to address the paradox here. If the potter deliberately manufactures someone to be a toilet or a beating stick, how can the clay be held morally responsible?
That's a massive red flag.
Right. Earlier, we discussed the necessity of being good clay, implying that the individual is responsible for their own internal state. But here, Paul argues the potter actively chose to make Pharaoh a beating stick. Didn't the potter choose the clay?
How do we reconcile human free will with the potter's absolute sovereignty? It feels like an impossible contradiction. It's like telling someone, you are entirely responsible for cleaning your room, but I have locked the door from the outside and I've tied your hands behind your back. If Pharaoh was hardened by God, Pharaoh never had a choice.
Ancient theological texts often present these two realities side by side, refusing to apologize for the friction between them. However, a synthesis can be found in the interaction between the clay's internal state and the potter's design.
Okay, lay that out for me.
The principle is this. If you actively fill your own vessel with impure thoughts, ego, and cruelty, what the ancients would metaphorically call feces, you naturally relegate yourself to the role of a toilet.
Okay, so the potter uses you as a toilet because you have already made yourself suitable only for waste. You act like a beating stick, so the universe utilizes you as a beating stick.
Exactly. The sovereignty of the potter uses the natural inclinations of the clay. Pharaoh already believed he was a god. His vessel was already filled with absolute arrogance. The potter merely utilized that existing arrogance to forge Moses.
Think about this in the context of your own life.
Yeah.
Have you ever encountered someone who seemed to exist solely to be a beating stick?
Oh, absolutely.
A terrible, abusive boss, a toxic friend who betrayed you, an undeniable antagonist. At the time, their presence in your life felt like useless, agonizing suffering. But looking back years later, were they actually the necessary obstacle that forced you to change course? Were they the hammer smashing your clay so you could be rebuilt into something stronger?
It radically shifts how you perceive your enemies. They are not merely villains in your story. They are structural tools in your own manufacturing process.
Which brings us to the final crucial theme of this deep dive: material versus purity. We talked about gold versus bronze earlier, but 2 Timothy 2 takes this concept a step further.
Yes, the Apostle Paul writes that in a large house, a great cauldron, there aren't just vessels of gold and silver. There are also vessels of wood and clay. Some are used for noble purposes, and some for ignoble.
But there is a massive pivot here. Being a gold vessel possessing high social status, immense wealth, natural charisma, or elite education means absolutely nothing if the vessel is filled with sewage.
A simple, thoroughly washed clay cup or a clean wooden bowl is infinitely superior to a solid gold toilet.
That's such a stark image.
It is, but it makes the point. The material, your inherent talents, your pedigree, your bank account is secondary. Purity, your emptiness, your readiness to hold truth is primary.
So the obvious practical question is, how does one actually get clean? How do you empty the vessel once it's full of ego? The book of James, chapter 1, introduces the metaphor of a mirror.
The word, the Tao, the truth, it acts as a mirror.
James writes that if you listen to the truth but do not act on it, you are like someone who looks closely at their face in a mirror, sees that they are covered in dirt, and then walks away, immediately forgetting what they look like.
It is a profound failure of self-awareness and action. You are presented with the reality of your own impurity. You see the grime. But you refuse to endure the discomfort of scrubbing the vessel. You choose amnesia.
To counter this failure, we look at the ultimate historical example of self-cleansing, the Apostle Paul himself. Cross-referencing Acts 9 and Philippians 3 gives us a stunning profile of what it takes to empty a golden vessel.
Paul is the perfect case study because initially he is the ultimate beating stick.
Before he was Paul, he was Saul of Tarsus. He was an accomplice to the murder of Stephen. He was a religious zealot actively hunting down, arresting, and persecuting the early church.
He was literally the hammer striking the clay of the early believers.
Exactly. Yet in Acts 9, Jesus tells Ananias that this violent, dangerous persecutor is his chosen vessel.
And Ananias was terrified. He was like, why choose the cracked, violent pot?
Because underneath the violence, Paul possessed what society considered a flawless golden resume. He lists it out in Philippians to make a very specific point. He says, if anyone has reason to boast in the flesh, I have more. He was circumcised on the 8th day of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews.
In regard to the law, he was a Pharisee. He studied under Gamaliel, the most elite theological teacher of his day.
In the eyes of first-century Judean society, Paul was a golden chalice. He was the most elite, highly educated, religiously pure, culturally untouchable vessel available.
But, and this is the crux of the entire philosophy we've discussed today, Paul didn't just passively receive truth into his golden chalice. He realized something terrifying.
What was it?
He realized that his golden chalice was already full to the brim. It was overflowing with ego, social status, religious pride, and rigid ideology. And to hold the ultimate truth, he had to look at his elite resume, his degrees, his bloodline, his religious perfection, and count it all as literal dung.
Yeah.
The Chinese translation uses the term fengticle, sewage, filth, dirt.
It's one thing to empty a cup of water. It's another to look at your life's greatest achievements, your degrees, your status, your wealth, and say, this is actually sewage blocking me from the truth. That requires a terrifying level of self-awareness.
Society looked at Paul and saw a golden vessel overflowing with elite knowledge. Paul looked in the mirror of truth and realized that to become a vessel for the divine, he had to violently empty and sterilize himself. He had to take the very things that made him golden in the eyes of the world and throw them in the garbage.
It is the ultimate voluntary application of the hammer and the millstone. Paul smashed his own golden vessel so that the potter could rebuild him from the dust as a clean vessel. He traded the reality of being a golden toilet of the elite for the opportunity to be a clean clay cup of the divine.
And we have covered an immense philosophical landscape today.
We really have. Let's trace the path of this journey.
We started in the East with Laozi's heavenly vessels, establishing the fundamental rule that the human soul is a container waiting to be filled and that great vessels take long to complete.
We moved into the apocalyptic visions of Revelation, decoding the golden bowls of wrath. We realized that the apocalypse isn't a sci-fi movie in the clouds. It's a metaphor for divine judgment, exposing the spiritual diseases corrupting human leadership.
We examined the living scales of Revelation 6, recognizing that a human being aligned with the Tao becomes the very standard by which a corrupt society is measured.
We confronted the brutal physics of the clay, the absolute necessity of emptiness, the violent reality that the ego must be pulverized by the hammer of adversity before it can hold anything of value.
We wrestled with the potter's prerogative in Romans 9, the uncomfortable reality that the universe sometimes utilizes arrogant people as beating sticks to forge our character, only to discard them when the work is done.
And finally, we witnessed Paul's radical self-emptying. The realization that all the goals, status, and pedigree in the world cannot make a vessel useful if it is already filled with ego.
We learned that our true value is not found in the material we are made of. The universe does not care if society views you as gold, silver, wood, or clay. Your value is entirely determined by your purity, by what you actively choose to empty out, so that you can be filled with something greater.
What is incredibly compelling to me is that our source material actually ends on a cliffhanger.
Oh, yes.
The lecturer promises that in the next session they will reveal the exact method the potter uses to construct the kiln and fire the clay. They've explained the theory of the vessel and the necessity of the fire, but the actual mechanical reality of enduring that fire is yet to come.
Which means the manufacturing process isn't over.
No, it's not. And we will absolutely do a follow-up deep dive when that material is available. But for now, as you step back into your day, look around at those objects again. The coffee mug, the vase.
Consider them a mirror.
We spend our entire lives trying to arbitrarily upgrade our vessel. We spend all our time and energy trying to turn our simple clay cup into a silver one, and our silver cup into a solid gold chalice. We want the resume, the corner office, the title, the social status. But what if the universe doesn't care about the gold at all? What if the only question that actually matters is, what are you refusing to pour out?